نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So today's lecture has a very broad and general title, Atheism and Science, and our brother Zubair Hafizahullah requested me to mention some words on this topic because there is in Pakistan, as there are in other Muslim countries such as Egypt for example, a base or a presence of atheists, and there are two reasons for that. First of all, India and also Egypt were places where the colonialists, the British, they spent a long time, and many of their ideas such as democracy for example, or rationalism, modernism, they had an effect on the people there. The second more direct reason is because of Muslims traveling to Western institutions for their education in the sciences, and not really understanding the history of Western civilization, the recent Western civilization, and how many of the ideas that these civilizations run upon, where they came from, what their origins were, what the reasons and purposes were. So being ignorant of that, and also of the Islamic creed, not being grounded in Islamic creed, they are affected by many of these materialist speculative theories and ideas, and then they bring them back, and then obviously from there are other factors that come into it as well. So on that basis I want to discuss numerous points inshallah ta'ala and string them all together, and there's an essential point that I want to make by way of this lecture, which I'll try to emphasize as we get through the content inshallah ta'ala. So the first thing that we begin with is the issue of the fitrah. Allah Azza wa Jal, as you know, He says in the Quran, أَفِي اللَّهِ شَكْ فَاطِرِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. And so the Mufassirun, they give two explanations behind this verse. This is the statement of the messengers, وَقَالَتْ رُسُلُهُمْ أَفِي اللَّهِ شَكْ فَاطِرِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. So the first interpretation is that the first part of the statement, أَفِي اللَّهِ شَكْ, meaning, how can there be any doubt or question? The fitrah is something that innately accepts in a creator and a maker behind what we see. So how can you even doubt this? Is there any doubt about Allah, His existence? And so this is an appeal to the fitrah. And if the fitrah has been corrupted or diverted from its origin, then the second half of the verse, فَاطِرِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, this now is an appeal to the evidence of rububiyyah, to direct the fitrah back to its original state. Now this is one interpretation. The second interpretation is أَفِي اللَّهِ شَكْ, meaning, is there any doubt that Allah is worthy of worship? Is there any doubt about Allah's uluhiyah, that He is worthy of worship? And if there is any doubt or deviation from that, what is the answer? فَاطِرِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, which means an appeal to the evidences of rububiyyah to show that He indeed is worthy of worship. So upon that, Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he said that whoever reflects upon the upper part of the world and the lower part of the world and whatever is in between, he will see all of it being a testimony or testifying to its maker and its creator. So this shows purely from hiss, right? So this is a key word, hiss. Hiss is just merely sensory perception, just looking, observing, seeing, right? This is different to reason, aql. We are speaking here only of hiss. Just hiss alone, right? Just direct experience of the senses. This informs us by all of the input that we receive in terms of what we see, of the phenomena of the sun, the moon, the trees, the rain, the animals, and all the events that take part therein. All of that indicates that there is an order, there's regularity, there are wisdoms, there are goals behind what we see, there are many different cause and effect systems that interlock with each other. All of this is absolutely undeniable. And this realization itself is actually the very foundation of science, right? Science, which we'll speak about in the second half of the lecture, inshallah ta'ala, which is basically the study of the creation and looking at causes and effects. Science has to have certain presuppositions. You have to have certain assumptions before you do science. And these presuppositions, they are rooted in the fitrah. They are inseparable from the fitrah, right? These presuppositions, these assumptions that you have to make first, is that the universe or the world or the heavens and the earth, there is order. There is order. There is regularity. Without regularity, you can't do science, because you have to have consistent, results and consistent patterns, right? So there's order, there's regularity, there are wisdoms, meaning there are purposes behind things, there are goals, there are lots of interactions, and there are, like I said. So this is the presupposition from which science itself is based upon, which is why it is impossible to erase the fitrah and at the same time claim to be able to do science. You can't do that, right? Because the fitrah, as we see in another verse, as the man said in Surah Yasin, the man who came from the outskirts of the city, and he said, وَمَا لِيَ لَا أَعْبُدُ الَّذِي فَطَرَنِي وَإِلَيْهِ تُرْجَعُونَ. So his argument here is to those people who rejected the messengers, why should I not worship the one who fatarani, meaning the one who originated me? And here the word fitra, again, when we look at the scholars and their use of the word fitra, it has a number of meanings which combine all the things that we are speaking of. It has the meaning of being originated, created, right? So obviously this man and the heavens and the earth and animals and plants, they are all originated, and Allah is the Fatir. He is the originator of all of that. And also fitra, meaning the inclination, like the mold that Allah has created every child upon, which is an inclination to recognize Him innately, without any reasoning, without anything else, to desire to worship Him, to be inclined to the truth, to love the truth, to prefer the truth. These are basic. It's like a raw disposition Allah has put in every single child. And so this man, he is basically using this argument, why should I not worship the one who originated me, and to him shall you return? We see that even the people of disbelief, there is no dispute or question about any of this. And I want to mention just some research from Oxford University, and this is some academics there. They are looking at this issue of whether children, are they disposed to be believers in a creator. And so there's an article, there's some research, and the research was given some coverage in one of the newspapers in an article called "Humans May Be Primed to Believe in Creation." And I want to quote just some statements of one of the kind of lead researchers. His name is Dr. Justin Barrett, and he's a senior researcher at the University of Oxford Centre for Anthropology and Mind. And he claims that young people have a predisposition to believe in a supreme being because they assume, this is not learned, right? So this is something innate. They assume that everything in the world was created with a purpose. He says that young children have faith even when they have not been taught about it by family or at school. And he argues, meaning the Dr. Barrett, that even those raised alone on a desert island would come to believe in God. He then says, a direct quote, "The preponderance," meaning lots of scientific evidence, "for the past 10 years or so has shown that a lot more seems to be built into the natural development of children's minds than we once thought, including a predisposition to see the natural world as designed and purposeful, and that some kind of intelligent being is behind that purpose," he told BBC Radio 4's Today programme. "If we threw a handful on an island and they raised themselves, I think they would believe in God." Now obviously, as you are listening to these words, you are immediately thinking the hadith of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Ma min mawludin illa yuladu ala al-fitra." There is no child except that it is born upon the fitrah. And then it is parents, for abawahu yuhawidanihi aw yumajjisanihi aw yunassiranihi. It is the parents thereafter that then cause that deviation away from the original disposition. The article then goes on to mention some of the kind of experiments that they did, and it goes on to say that another experiment on 12-month-old babies suggested that they were surprised by a film in which a rolling ball apparently created a neat stack of blocks from a disordered heap. Right, so meaning that when you see something orderly being made, something arranged, something brought together, this brings surprise. Right, it's something that catches the attention of even a 12-month-old baby. He goes on to say, Dr. Barrett said that there is evidence that even by the age of 4, children understand that although some objects are made by humans, the natural world is different. He added that this means children are more likely to believe in creationism rather than evolution, despite what they may be told by parents or teachers. And he said, in some anthropologists have found that in some cultures children believe in God even when religious teachings are withheld from them, meaning that you don't have to be told there's a creator, there's a maker, and if you are deprived of any kind of religious teaching, children will grow up to believe in God. He says children's normally and naturally developing minds make them prone to believe in divine creation and intelligent design. He says, in contrast, evolution is unnatural for human minds, relatively difficult to believe. So as you can see, this is just one example. There are many other pieces of research as well. And as he said, this is the last 10 years of research is overwhelming in coming to this conclusion. So this is not really anything that's in dispute. We come to the ayah that you are familiar with, فَأَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا فِطْرَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا. And again, the Mufassirun, they say this means the fitrah of Allah means Islam. This is one explanation, Islam. People being inclined to Islam, meaning to single out Allah in worship after recognizing Him. Or it can mean that Allah has put man in a certain mold, like a physical form, like a certain way in which there should be no alteration. Or it can also mean that the way Allah has created children to be inclined to His belief naturally, that can never ever be erased, right? So you can never engineer humans to be born to not have this fitrah, to not have this inclination to recognize a creator. So then there's also the hadith, inni khalaqtu ibadi hunafa. Indeed, I created my servants hunafa, meaning upright, inclined to his worship, inclined to the truth, swerving away from shirk, swerving away from falsehood, not being inclined to it. Then the hadith mentions, then the shayateen came, فَاجْتَالَتْهُمُ الشَّيَاطِينَ فَحَرَّمَتْ عَلَيْهِمْ مَا أَحْلَلْتُ لَهُمْ. They made haram what I made halal for them, and فَأَمَرَتْهُمْ, commanded them to associate partners with me in that for which I gave them no authority. So all of this you are familiar with, the issue of the fitrah, and so we are going to tie all these things together inshallah ta'ala. But the point to understand from this first discussion of the fitrah is that the assumption of science, the presuppositions of science, that the universe is consistent, it's orderly, it's regular, it has patterns, there are cause and effect systems, there are wisdoms, there are goals, there are hikam, there are ghayat. All of this is something that is undeniable. Nobody denies this. And this is something that is known purely just by hiss, right? You only need to just look and that's it. There's nothing else. There's no reasoning, there's no philosophy, there's nothing of that nature whatsoever. So from that, the fitrah and the basic, there's other things in the fitrah as well. For example, Ibn Taymiyyah mentions that, or there are certain things which are part of the fitrah. For example, when a child is playing with a toy and the toy kind of rolls and it goes over there, it's from the fitrah of the child not to look like this or like this. Because in the fitrah is to know that a thing cannot be in two places at the same time. Right? So the behavior of the child is built upon certain things which are rooted in the fitrah, but they're not consciously thought about. Right? So the child will always go in that direction because it knows a thing cannot be in two places at the same time. Likewise, if you were to, obviously we wouldn't do this, but if someone was to slap a child, a toddler, the toddler would start crying. And it would feel wronged. And it would also have some anticipation of justice. Because so let's say, for example, there's a toddler and a sibling slapped the child for no reason, and the child that starts crying because it feels that it knows that is unjust, and it also anticipates justice. So if the parent comes along and then slaps and disciplines the older child, the small child will feel comforted and may even stop crying, right? So we know this through experience that things like this happen with children. So there are many more things in the fitrah. It's not just recognizing a creator. There are other things in the fitrah as well. So the point we are making from all of this, look at the meaning of the word fitrah, look at the origin of the root fatara in the dictionaries, and you will see two meanings. Fatara, to originate, to commence, to originate. Also like a mold, right? To mold something into a particular form or a shape or a way or an inclination. So when you tie all of this together, what we quoted from that research from Dr. Barrett and what is similar to that, it shows that every child is born upon that fitrah. It innately recognizes design, purpose, meaning, and the conclusion that is inevitable is that there is a maker. And if left like this, the child will believe in a creator and will want to show gratitude and worship for the favors that he perceives, and which he then rationally understands when he grows older. So that really was the first point, and the key thing to take again is the word fitrah, its meanings, and tying all of that together. This now leads us to my second citation, which is from Shaykh Ali Nasir al-Faqihi, hafidhahullah ta'ala, And this is from his master's thesis, which he wrote almost 50 years ago. Almost 50, maybe 45, 50 years ago. And it's published, it's called Manhajul Quran fi Da'wati ila al-Iman. And in there he has a very beautiful passage. And so he says, and I'll mention just the translation for the sake of brevity and for the sake of time. He says, knowledge of the existence of Allah, an affirmation of His existence, is an innate, deeply embedded trait. Right? So there's no dispute about this, because we've heard the research, and there's no dispute about that. An innate, deeply embedded trait in the human being, because everyone from the offspring of Adam affirms the existence of a creator and acknowledges him. As for what some of the atheists make apparent of disbelief in Allah, and making mockery of those who call them to worship him, then this does not mean that they possess absolute disbelief, founded on complete certainty. What he's saying here is that these atheists, who obviously they disbelieve in Allah, they make mockery of the believers, and they exult in whatever knowledge they have, they're not saying this from absolute disbelief and absolute certainty. They don't have absolute certainty, but rather it's emanating from a corruption, a deviation from human nature. This is what he says. Rather, what they are upon is a deviation from human nature, which includes turning that innate, meaning the fitrah, which is inclined to the creator, turning it away from the natural state to the worship of created things, right? So meaning that the atheist is not operating upon absolute, unequivocal disbelief, right? And I will give you evidences that this is true from some citations later on, right? It's not based upon absolute certainty. Rather, what the atheist is a manifestation of is simply a deviation of human nature. That's what it is. That's what's giving rise to whatever his claims and beliefs are. Right? So he says, hence we find the atheist using deception and false explanations of things as a means of misguiding people and camouflaging the truth from the naive among his followers. Right. So this is apparent. He then goes on, he says, the noble Quran has presented to us the story of the greatest deceiving atheist who deceived others through his tongue by that which he himself was not convinced of in his heart. Again, remember these words, they're very important. That deceiver is Fir'aun, who belittled his people through his deception of them, and they obviously obeyed him. Fir'aun became arrogant and rejected the Lord of the worlds. Rather, he claimed that he does not know of any other deity for them besides himself. The Mawla, meaning Allah Azza wa Jal, he informed us about him that his rejection arose from him as mere deception with the tongue, and that this deception was not in agreement with the affair that was settled in the heart. Right? And this is true of every atheist, right? There's something in the heart of the atheist that he's concealing. He's not going to show to you. He's going to keep it to himself. And whatever he's trying to do with the tongue is just camouflaging the truth and, deception and things like that. He says that his rejection arose from him as mere deception with the tongue. And this deception was not something, it was not in agreement with whatever was settled in his heart. He mentions the ayah, which is the statement of Musa alayhi salam, قَالَ لَقَدْ عَلِمْتَ مَا أَنزَلَ هَؤُلَاءِ إِلَّا رَبُّ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. He says, you, O Fir'aun, you know that no one sent down these ayat, these signs, except the Lord of the heavens and the earth, as evidences, and I do think you, O Fir'aun, that you are going to be destroyed. And in another verse, Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, وَجَحَدُوا بِهَا, that they rejected the signs, وَاسْتَيْقَنَتْهَا أَنفُسُهُمْ ظُلْمًا وَعُلُوًا. They rejected the signs even though their souls were convinced thereof, out of dhulm, meaning out of oppression, and out of ulu, meaning wanting to seek highness upon the earth. The Shaykh continues, thus deviating and swerving from the straight path is incidental among humanity, and this is when the fitrah becomes corrupt. Then he continues, this is because the evidence for the existence of a creator is a perceived reality and an affair of utmost clarity. Meaning, the issue of Allah's existence is nothing more than just mere observation, and that's it. Right? It's sense perception, that's it, nothing else. And it is the most clear and apparent of things. He continues, man subsists and lives in this creation. He witnesses in his own self and in the affairs around him constant change. Some things expire, they no longer exist. Others come into existence, as is observed in a detailed, organized way in everything that can be seen. So meaning, the cloud is not there, the cloud appears, the cloud disappears, right? A baby is not there 1 week, and another week a baby is there after having not existed. These types of events that we see occurring, in their thousands and millions upon millions, are all around us. We observe them, we see them, and they occur in a detailed, organized, routine, consistent way. So from sensory perception, the Shaykh says, it is known that these affairs have an originator which brought them into existence and arranged them to give them their behavior and their movements, which he desired for them. This conclusion is very natural and not far removed from the understanding of any person, whatever his level of comprehension might be. Right? So this is an evidence for everybody. For the simple person, uneducated, who is the tailor, the road sweeper, the baker, the butcher, and for the sophisticated, intelligent person. Because Allah's existence is not dependent upon deep, long-winded, philosophical arguments that only the elite can understand, because this then would not really be from justice. Rather, Allah's existence should be available to everybody through something that they all share in, which is sense perception, the ability to see and the ability to hear, and a basic level of reflection. The Shaykh continues, when a person observes an arranged and orderly house, or hears a sound, or feels the strike of a whip, but he doesn't see, in each case, the striker, or the house builder, or the speaker, he has certainty that this house has a builder, that the sound came from something or someone, whether a man, animal or machine, and that the strike came from a striker. Right? This is something that everybody knows. Right? You hear a sound, there's got to be something or someone behind it. You see a house, the builder has to exist somewhere, even though you've never seen him, and so on and so forth. Thus, the existence of the thing from which the construction of the house arose, or the emanation of the sound, or the occurrence of the strike, is a definitive conclusion. It's a definitive conclusion for the one who observes the house, hears the sound, or feels the strike. When the evidence of sensory perception, hiss, right? So remember, we have not gone beyond hiss in the argument here. And this is the argument of the Quran. There's no philosophy in the Quran. There's no long-winded rhetoric in the Quran. It's arguing by the simplest, most direct faculty available to everybody. So when the evidence of sensory perception for its existence has been established, then belief in the cause which brought about these affairs into existence is a matter uncontested among intelligent people. He continues, likewise, when a person observes changes that take place in things which are present, they expire into non-existence and other things emerge, and also the amazing order which exists in the world, the extreme meticulousness in the behavior of certain creatures, and how their movements have been arranged, the precision in their timings. A person comprehends that all of this unique creation and order, and this constant flux of change, cannot have arisen from those entities themselves, because they are incapable of bringing it about, just as they are incapable of resisting it. So all of that as well is evidence which invites to belief in the existence of a creator for all of these entities who arranges and regulates them. This argument here that the Shaykh Ali Nasir al-Faqihi has described was the actual argument, or one of the arguments of Musa alayhi salam against Fir'aun. This very argument, because Fir'aun said to Musa, فَمَنْ رَبُّكُمَا يَا Musa, who is this Lord of you two, Harun and Musa? Who is this Lord of you both, O Moses? And so Musa alayhi salam, he gave the answer, قَالَ رَبُّنَا الَّذِي أَعْطَى كُلَّ شَيْءٍ خَلْقَهُ ثُمَّ هَدَى. Our Lord is the one who gave to everything its creation and then gave it its guidance. And so the Mufassirun, they explain from the Sahaba and those after them, what this means is that Allah has created every creature with a specific form, with a specific, in a specific way. And then He inspired it as to its habitat, as to its food, as to its drink, as to its behaviors, and so on and so forth. And when we observe this around us, this is, again, from sense perception, it is a clear evidence of the existence of a maker. Just like there are similar arguments in the Quran, we see Allah mentions how there are many different fruits of different flavors and tastes and colors, and we see that all of them, they are nourished and brought about by one water, right? So you have a seed, a seed, a seed, a seed, or a flower, a flower, a flower. It is one water, but you see all of the diversity in the appearance, the colors, the taste, the nourishment. All of that cannot be except by prior arrangement, right? By creation. So these types of arguments, one of the things that you should understand as we go through these arguments is that this is the way of the Quran. This is the way of the prophets and messengers. It is the most simple, direct, definitive, uncontestable method which proves an actual existence of Allah, right? It is a wujud aini. It is an actual direct existence of Allah. It is not like we find with the philosophers and the people of Kalam and people like that. They can only establish a wujud mutlaq, which means it's like a non-specific generalized existence that exists only in the mind, right? So to illustrate what this means, again, giving the example of if I had a pen in my hand right now, if I had a pen in my hand right now, my argument would be that this specific pen, the physical pen, is in itself a dalil or an ayah of the actual, real, tangible, true existence of the one or the group of people who made it, right? And I know that those people have knowledge, they have will, they have power, because that's what it takes to make a pen which has a specific purpose behind it, right? So this now is a wujud aini, a specific existence. And this is something that you find in the statement of that Bedouin, which the Shaykh quotes. He says, this is attested to by the statement of that Bedouin who said, camel droppings point to a camel, tracks in the sand point to a traveler, and a dark night, a still day, and a heaven possessed of stars, do they not point to a fully aware creator? Right? So this, again, this same argument, it is a wujud aini. It is a specific, actual affirmation of something true and real that, exists. Whereas if you use like the philosophical arguments that you find with the people of philosophy and the people of Kalam, right, they are not affirming anything specific, right? They are just affirming things which only the mind can basically, it's a wujud in the dhihn, in the mind only, not a specific evidence. He then continues, and we're coming to the end of his speech now, that this Bedouin comprehended through his intact innate disposition which Allah created him upon, that these mighty creations which proceed upon order and precision, a night followed by a day followed by night, that this cannot come about except through an originator, and that they do not proceed with such orderly precision except through one who determined this precision with choice. And thus the clear evidences of the Noble Quran have come, directing attention to what the senses of the human can observe, to point to the existence of the Creator and to the truth of worshipping Him alone thereafter. Then the final statement, and thus we see that the issue of creation and origination, even if it is a dry issue in the field of philosophy. What does he mean by this? He means that when you look in philosophy, you see that there's like long-winded, deeply sophisticated, philosophical type arguments with difficult terms and monotonous and boring and right. You don't see any of that here. None of that is here. This is very simple, direct, powerful, incontestable. It is self-evident in the field of sensory perception alone, requiring no evidence, because it is from the necessities of the innate disposition. As such, the Noble Quran presents the issue to those being addressed as a matter that is uncontested, requiring no inference and not subject to argument or disputation. Right? So there's no inference that needs to be made, there's no deduction that needs to be made, there's no argument, there's none of that. This type of argument is incontestable, and I'll give you an illustration of this. So if you imagine that you are in a house with someone, and in the house there's food and drink and all sorts of beautiful furniture, comfortable, and in every room you go to there's a delight that you see, and just by experiencing that, you know that there is a maker and a benefactor, one who gave this benefit and this favor behind this house, right? And so when you come across someone who is in denial of that, and you basically want to prove to him that what he's saying is nonsense, the only thing you need to do is to say, look at this, look at that, right? That in itself is incontestable proof. Right, so this is the nature of the argument of the Quran. There's nothing beyond this. We don't need to go and delve into any other argument or dispute or engage in philosophy. It's as simple as that. And so therefore, when the atheist or he's observing the ayat, he is experiencing and tasting and drinking from the ni'am of Allah Azza wa Jal, which are all on him. The clothing that he's wearing, the air that he's breathing, the water that he's drinking, the sun which gives the light and energy that is one of many causes that keep him alive. All of that is in itself direct proof of the falsity of his claim. Right. So this is the second quotation that I wanted to bring from Shaykh Ali Nasr al-Faqihi, Hafidhahullah Ta'ala, and I want to add to what Shaykh Ali Nasr said from Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah. He has a very beautiful passage in Al-Fawaid, his book Al-Fawaid, and there's a chapter where it is titled 2 Ways to Know the Creator, and within there is a very simple kind of illustration of a proof for Allah's existence, which is identical to what we've just mentioned already. So he says, فَأَمَّا الْمَفْعُولَاتِ فَإِنَّهَا دَالَةٌ عَلَى الْأَفْعَالِ. He says, indeed, maf'ulat, things which are kind of made or produced, then they are indicative of actions performed. This is very simple, right? This is very clear of actions that have been performed upon it. Very simple. Likewise this, and likewise this, and likewise that, and likewise that. It's incontestable. And likewise also to the natural world, as we see, a tree, all types of animals, and everything else which has properties and qualities. That is indicative of actions which have been performed upon it. وَالْأَفْعَالِ دَالَةٌ عَلَى الصِّفَاتِ. Those actions in turn are indicative of attributes, right? So when I look at that and I see, okay, there's actions which have been performed, this is undeniable, and from that I know that there must be attributes behind those actions. What are those attributes? You know, it is knowledge, it is will, it is power. Ibn al-Qayyim says, فَإِنَّ الْمَفْعُولِ يَدُلُّ عَلَى فَاعِلِ فِعْلِهِ. Right? Something which is made indicates the action of its doer. وَذَلِكَ يَسْتَلْزِمُ وُجُودَهُ وَقُدْرَتَهُ وَمَشِيئَتَهُ وَعِلْمَهُ. Right? So that necessitates his existence and his power and his will and his knowledge. Right? So this is incontestable, that this thing right here is in itself a direct proof of the one who made it. He definitely exists out there, even though if I've never seen him, and also his power, his will, and his knowledge. And then he says, this is because of the impossibility لاستحالة صدور الفعل الاختياري من معدوم أو موجود لا قدر له ولا حياة له ولا علم ولا إرادة. This is because of the impossibility of a willfully chosen action to arise from something that doesn't exist, or from something that exists but has no power, has no life, has no knowledge, has no will or wish. Right. So this excellent, short, concise paragraph, again, this is a very important citation, because through it and through what Shaykh Ali Nasir al-Faqihi has said, we are going to evaluate the statements of certain atheists who acknowledge these things, and we are also going to expose the shallowness and the foolishness and the stupidity of those atheists who, stubbornly and arrogantly they reject these things. Right, so this now ends the second main point I wanted to make, the two quotes from Shaykh Ali Nasir and from Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, showing the general methodology of the Quran. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to illustrate this with more examples. So we're going to build upon what's already there, and we are going to illustrate with more examples from modern science and knowledge of Allah's creation, just to impress upon you the clarity of this evidence, right? And to show that this is something that cannot really be denied, and that this compelling proof is what has forced the atheists in the past decade or two to acknowledge and to admit and to accept that what they are proposing and what they are following, right? It is emotional, it is religious, right? It's nothing to do with science. And that's the direction that we are going towards, right? And so what I want to prove from all of that is to really show that the Pakistani atheist sitting in Islamabad somewhere and teaching in a school, or the Egyptian atheist sitting in Egypt, whatever, who's gone to the West, drank the philosophy, drank the materialism, drank the pseudoscience, and come back to the Muslim lands, like he's living in cloud cuckoo land, right? Because he doesn't know what these people are really saying and what they are upon and what they are admitting, right? And that's the point that I want to really make, and I want to frame this discussion as to where should we be standing towards such people, right? Is it on the back foot and defensive? Or is it pointing down to them and looking at them from a superior point of view and exposing for them, for their benefit, their stupidity and their childlike mind, right? That's what we're developing in the course of this lecture. So to do that, the next point then is we want to just give a small selection of basically examples, to build upon that. So this first one basically is just like an article here, cells and computer engineering, right? So this is about the cell, the basic cell, and I want to just read like a short article. Study finds cell-wide web of tubules suggests cells work like computers. Right, I want you to pay attention to the words here now. Inside every cell, so the title, this is from the article, the research paper article, cells behave like biological computers. Right, so I want you to look at the sophistication that we are moving to. We started with something simple like this, right, and we are moving to like modern knowledge and what we've discovered and so on and so forth. Inside every cell, organelles that carry out the various little life processes sit in an enclosed area of material called cytoplasm. He says, now scientists at the University of Edinburgh have found evidence that animal and plant cells move information and instructions throughout the internal structure, similar to the way a computer operates when it routes these kind of signals through various circuits. Right. We found that cells function is coordinated by a network of nanotubes similar to the carbon nanotubes you find in a computer microprocessor. The research indicates that information within the cell is encoded in the form of charged molecules which are passed down the various paths of a cell-wide set of nanotubes, similar to the way an electric current is routed through circuits on the motherboard of a computer to its various component parts. These signals completely regulate the activities within the cell and are even responsible for the cell-wide behavior, just like when a muscle contracts and relaxes, right? The cell is like in real time. There's all these currents and feedback loops and, positive feedback loops, negative feedback loops. Everything is coordinated and information is being spread around, right, to achieve that basic simple process. This network within the cell can also be completely rewired as needed. Like he's saying that he says, for example, this network can relay instructions to the nucleus of the cell, which houses the genetic material. These instructions can make any alterations to the genetic structure, and he continues like that. The network will completely rewire itself in order to express the genes in the nucleus genetic code that enables the cell's growth. The most striking thing, and this is the end part, the most striking thing is that this circuit is highly flexible, as this cell-wide web can rapidly reconfigure to deliver different outputs in a manner determined by the information received by and relayed from the nucleus. Evans said, this is something no man-made processors or circuit boards are yet capable of achieving. Right, so, right, that you should be very clear. You see where we're getting at, that this is an ayah from the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nothing more needs to be said. If you are able to produce microprocessors and chips, they are the product of knowledge, power, wish, and you exalt and you praise yourself and you laud yourself for achieving such a thing, then how can you then deny that this doesn't have a maker and an originator, right? There's no argument here. There isn't any argument here. This is self-evident, right? And so this is why these modern atheists have retreated on the back foot, and they've acknowledged and admitted, because the evidence is now absolutely overwhelming, right? The honest ones amongst them, I'm going to quote from them inshallah in a short while. Anyway, this is the first example I wanted to give. Another example, very similar, is another article here in a magazine, scientific magazine called Horizons. It's called Life, Logic and Information, and I only want to mention a few things from here very quickly to show. So basically what they are doing, what they're trying to do, you can see the picture. This is like a circuit, and they're trying to mimic and reproduce the workings of a cell. And what they're describing here is that the working of a cell is unfathomably and complex, because there are so many things in here that we have to try and reproduce. There are logic circuits which manage information. There are negative feedback loops and there are positive feedback loops. There are, other modules which act as short-term memory devices. I could go on and on. I don't want to bore you with the details, right? You get the idea. You get the general gist of what I'm saying here, right? That's another example. Other examples that could be given very quickly. There would be, let's go to just a few more examples, inshallah, just from. One of them would be robot maker builds an artificial boy, right? So there's a guy who's basically, you can see the picture here, he's making an artificial like boy, small boy, and he's just describing the challenges and things that he's facing. But I want to mention just one part of it. He says, during a recent demonstration, Zeno could barely stand. Zeno is the artificial boy, could barely stand and had to be tethered to a bank of PCs that told it how to smile, frown, and be surprised, or wrinkle its nose in anger. Right. So meaning, just to be able to get this artificial boy to be able to smile, or to, frown, or to be surprised, they had a whole bank of PCs to basically process the computations, the calculations, just to achieve that one little thing, right? So again, that these people will be writing articles and saying how amazing they are and how they're going to uncover the secrets of life and this and how. All right, so if you are praising yourself and lauding yourself on account of this knowledge and this wisdom and this, power and ability, then how can you deny that the thing that you are trying to mimic and reproduce is not the product of knowledge and power and will and has an originator, right? There's no argument here. There's no argument here. You understand? There's no argument here. So that's another example. And a third example would be, you have something similar, a robot that navigates like a person. Same thing, I won't go into the details. Another one is an award given, a Turing Award, it's a famous award, given to a machine learning expert who is mimicking brain function, right? So, a machine learning expert who's trying to mimic the brain function. I won't read all the quotes and whatever. These are huge, massive, they are massive machines with computational power, and they are trying to mimic the functioning of the brain, which is basically just like two handfuls in your skull at the top here, right? So again, I won't mention all the, the text. I think that issue is self-evident. And finally, another example would just be, this is a good one. Proteins in the body have a zip code system which determines their destination. Right? So like when you write a letter, if we are in most countries, I write a letter, say I want to write a letter to Abu Khadija, for example. So I write my letter, it's the message, the information, then I enclose it in an envelope, I write the address, and at the address I put, the postcode, B10, B8 or whatever it might be. I go and post it into the letterbox, and then there's a whole system, there's an architecture, there's a system in between that knows exactly what to do, with that packet of information, and eventually it will get delivered, right? This is how proteins are working in the body. And there are numerous articles here from the Science Journal, from numerous other journals here, Biochemistry and Molecular Biology, another article here, protein zip codes and traffic in neurons using fluorescence, live cells imaging to sort it all out, right? So they're using certain techniques, fluorescence, to identify these zip codes and traffic that's going through the neurons, and they're identifying that they're actually like what resembles zip codes, right? So again, there's no question here. There's no question here. And the verse that comes to mind here is really the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, which applied to the people of the past, nations past who were destroyed, and it applies to the people present today. And this is the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, وَكَأَيٍّ مِّنْ آيَةٍ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ يَمُرُّونَ عَلَيْهَا وهم عنها معرضون. How many a sign in the heavens and the earth that they pass over, they pass by it, and then they turn away from it. Right? And also the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَتَّى يَتَبَيْنَ لَهُمْ أَنَّهُ الْحَقِّ. Soon shall we show them our signs in the horizons and in their own selves, until it becomes clear to them that this is the truth. Okay, so from all of these examples, again, there's a structure to what I'm saying, and there's a sequence to what I'm saying. That we started with the fitrah. We quoted the statements of Shaykh Ali Nasr al-Faqih and Ibn al-Qayyim. We've now given contemporary examples of all of this to illustrate and to make it even more concrete. And so this takes us really to a statement of Imam al-Sa'di rahimahullah ta'ala in his book Al-Adillah Al-Qawati' Wal-Barahin fi Ibtali Usul Al-Mulhidin. And he has a beautiful statement. He says, it is said to those atheists, those materialist atheists, يقال لهؤلاء الملاحدة الماديين, who is the one who originated these mighty creations of these creatures, these many creatures, and who is the one who made them precise with this amazing precision, and who is the one who arranged their motions and movements, which bewilder the minds in their precision and organization. And they will say, they will shout out, they will scream, إِنَّ هَذَا كُلَّهُ أَثَرُ الْمُصَادَفَةِ. All of this is the product of, random interactions and the actions and workings of nature, undirected, blind. There's no knowledge behind it, or power, or will, or wisdom, or anything like that. Right? This is their statement. And the Shaykh says, وَهَذَا قَوْلُهُمْ الَّذِي صَرَّحُوا بِهِ وَاقْتَدُوا فِيهِ بِالْمُتَمَرِّدِينَ مِنْ أَئِمَّتِهِمْ الضَّالِينَ. This is what they are making clear. They are following the stubborn, arrogant, misguided people. And so it becomes clear, therefore, that the intellects of these people are closer to the intellects of the insane and the mad than they are to the intellects of the children. Right? So this leads me nicely to the next point now, which would be, I guess, my fourth point, which is, so remember what he said, right? The intellect of an atheist is closer to the majaneen than it is to a child. So now my next point is, I want to give you a similitude of a child, and I'm going to show you the trick or the deception which materialism and atheism kind of generally it rests upon, and where the theories emanate from. So this similitude is like this. If you imagine you as a parent, you leave your house and your child is in a specific room, let's say the kitchen, and in the middle of a table there is a large glass. It's in the middle of a round table, and there are stools, and there's no one else. You close the door, you go away for 10 minutes, you come back and you find a shattered glass on the floor. Okay, so you turn to the child and you say to the child, who broke this glass? How did this glass break? Right? So this child, because children of a certain age, they are naive, they are innocent, and they don't have, they haven't reached that higher intellectual function, so they try to escape like the discipline or the anger or whatever. They very naively think, or they say something, and they say, it fell and it broke, or it fell down and it broke by itself. Right? This is just like from the innocence of a child saying this. And we experience, I'm sure some of you have experienced these things from your children, that they say something and it's from their naivety and their innocence, because they want to avoid the discipline. So what the child's trying to do here is trying to absolve any responsibility, to absolve itself from any blame, and to be free from any kind of discipline. It is, it fell itself, it broke itself, and we all know this is patently and blatantly false. We know it's false. We know this cannot be. We know that the only way is that the child, climbed onto the stool, and you can see the stool slightly moved as well, and tried to mess about with a glass, and then it fell off, rolled off because it's round, and it fell off, and it broke off. Right? That event had a cause. Right? What did the child try to do? It tried to put the cause back into the thing itself. Right? Can you see the shallowness? Obviously, the child is not rationally thinking. It's from the naivety and it's from its innocence that it's coming out with this really shallow explanation. Right? If you understand this example here, that's all of Western materialism, naturalism, and atheism in a nutshell. Now, that's all you really need to know. Right? And what the atheists do, or what the materialists do, is that the simplicity of their stupidity, they try to make it so sophisticated and complex that they bamboozle people and draw people in. Right? So, to give an illustration, they might say, like, someone might come along and say, oh, yes, the reason why the glass broke was because we got a perfect explanation. There was, in the volume of that room, the random fluctuations, between the matter in energy, in the vacuum of the space between the molecules, led to these fluctuations. They amplified, and the glass being in a position on a table prominent, it kind of absorbed those random fluctuations, and it became so big that the glass literally just toppled over, rolled, and we can prove it. And here, look on the board here, F equals fluctuations, V equals the volume of the room, G equals glass, whatever, and then they will mathematize the whole thing. And because with mathematics you can, because mathematics is consistent and it is, whatever, they will make a model, and when all the equations add up and become equal, it says, we proved it. The mathematics proves that it can be so. You understand? What I've given you there by this example is the essence, the quintessence of the materialist, naturalist, atheist religion. And some of them are honest enough to say religion. Right? That's all you need to know. So like I said to you before, in fact, I'll give you an example. The brother of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he had a brother called Abdullah ibn Taymiyyah. And Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he mentions a debate that he had with a Jahmi. Right? A Jahmi who is a negator of the attributes. So basically, he presented the argument in such a convincing, powerful way. He said, look, in the Quran, Allah has mentioned His names, attributes in different ways. He either mentions the ism, right, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, or He mentions the masdar, the verbal noun. So He says, for example, Anzalahu bi'ilmihi, right? Allah sent it down with His knowledge. So He mentioned the masdar, the ilm, as a sifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or He'll mention the hukm by way of a verb. So for example, قَدْ سَمِعَ اللَّهُ قَوْلَ الَّتِي تُجَادِلُكَ فِي زَوْجِهَا. Allah has indeed heard. So here Allah has made the hukm that He hears by way of a verb, right? These three methods of the Quran in indicating His names and attributes, the whole Quran is filled with them, right? So for you to now come and say that this must be made ta'weel of, we have to make ta'weel of all of this, right? That means that you are making one of three accusations. You are accusing the Messenger of Allah of three things. You are either accusing him in his knowledge, or you are accusing him in his bayan, his ability to speak, or you are accusing him in his nasiha, meaning his desire to give sincere advice. So either the Messenger knew all of this, meaning that these aren't really attributes, they are just metaphors, right? Or he didn't know that. So if you are saying that he was ignorant of the fact that these are metaphors in the Quran, you've now reviled the Messenger of Allah in his ilm. So it's either that. It's either that. If you say, no, he knew that it wasn't really attributes but only allegories and metaphors, they weren't really intended. But he was either able to convey that in speech or he wasn't able to convey that in speech. right? So if you say, oh well, he didn't have the means and the ability, he wasn't eloquent enough to really, speak with the truth, you are now reviling him in his bayan, discourse, his ability to speak, right? But if you say, no, he was perfectly able to speak and to explain these things, there wasn't any impediment, then either he knowingly withheld that truth from them, or he told them that truth. But because he hasn't told them that truth upon what your claim, then that means he was knowingly deceiving them by not telling them what he knew to be the truth, right? That yad isn't the attribute of hand, it means qudra or ni'mah, right? That istiwa it means, that he conquered, right? He knowingly withheld this information. Now you are attacking his nasiha, his sincerity, his nush to the ummah. So which of the three is it then? So that Jahmi stopped and thought, and he said, you know what? You've subdued me from above. Right? He had nothing to say and he knew he'd been destroyed in argument. So the point being that this is the same way how a person of Tawheed and the Sunnah who follows the hujjaj of the Quran and the method of the Quran and of the Anbiya, this is the relationship, right? Not like these clowns and idiots and fools who are in these parks and places, arguing with getting nowhere, long-winded arguments, accepting their speculative people like, we don't need to name them, right? They don't achieve anything. This is how a person of Tawheed and the Sunnah, this is how his relationship with the likes of these people. Okay, so now I want to move from this now into the issue of science. So the first half really is the fitrah. It is, the presuppositions of science. Sense perception is sufficient. Clear evidences and arguments, right? You've heard all of that. I want to now move to the second half really, which is the science aspect of it, and speak about the scientific method. Shaykh As-Sa'di rahimahullah ta'ala, he has a beautiful book called Al-Dalail Al-Qur'aniyah fi anna al-ulum al-nafi'ah al-asriyah dakhilatun fi ad-din al-islami, which is Quranic evidences to show that beneficial contemporary sciences enter into the religion of Islam. I could quote from this book, but to keep it, to avoid lengthening the whole thing, what we take from this book and its contents is that Islam does not reject science or the scientific method, the true scientific method, and investigating the creation, understanding causes and their effects, and manipulating that knowledge for the benefit of mankind, right? And for the atheists or people like them to claim that we are backward and that we are ignorant, this is from the greatest of slanders, because anyone knows who looks into the Muslim world in the East and the West that the Muslims, they are engrossed in this type of knowledge and this science. We have doctors, physicians, engineers, and even the common person, he knows how to fix a car, this is a vile slander. To say that Muslims are opposed to science and learning and progress, and this is like really, it's kind of a below the belt type of punch for them to really say this. It's not true. But what we want to understand really is that what they claim to be science, they are claiming that they are discovering secrets about the universe and how they've come to the conclusion that there's no creator. Right, and they're using science for this. This is not true. They're not using the science for this. There's two types of science. There's a science which is religion, and there's a science which is a method. Understand? Right? There's a science which is a method, and there's a science which is a religion. And the science which is a religion, they have put certain assumptions in there. Right? They've entered philosophy into the picture. They've said the type of science we want to do is philosophical naturalism or methodological naturalism. What is this? What do these terms mean? What are they really saying? What they are really saying is, we're not happy living in a world where there's a creator. We don't like that type of world that operates in that way, right? So what we are going to do, not with any evidence, not with any proof, not by using the scientific method itself to prove this position, what we are going to do is we are going to operate, we're going to have this thing called metaphysical naturalism or philosophical naturalism, meaning that we're going to eliminate the creator out the picture, and all we want to do is just understand cause and effect mechanisms, right? We're not going to allow any discussion of, that there's wisdom behind this and there's a will behind. No, we want to throw all of that out, and we're going to operate on this basis, right? This is like a religion, right? You've chosen this view philosophically, right? You haven't proven this view by way of the scientific method itself, right? Science is a method. What you've chosen here and described here is a philosophy and an approach. It is a religion, right? So now I want to quote for you some statements of those honest, truthful atheists who readily admit that this is the case, right? So here are some statements. The first statement is, the first statement is from a man called Daniel Dennett. Daniel Dennett, right? This is a famous neo-atheist, right? This is from those people who try to revive atheism. Atheism in the early 20th century, it had a relapse because one of the main ideas that they used, it's an idea called logical positivism, right? I won't go into the details. There's a man called Anthony Flew, right? He promoted it, and atheists became very happy about this, in the 30s, 40s, 50s. But then they realized that it was false, right? Because it couldn't meet its own criteria. So from the 50s, atheism kind of like they had to put the hands back in the pockets and go in the back streets and kick cans and this, there was nothing to do. These new atheists like Daniel Dennett, Hitchens, Krauss, and these people, right? These are what we call the new atheists. This is the new breed who are trying to come and deceive us again, right? With the same simple, childlike, simple kind of analogy which I gave. So I'm going to mention to you some quotes from this Daniel Dennett. What does he say? Right, and again, he's a prominent neo-Darwinist and a new atheist. He says, scientists sometimes deceive themselves into thinking that philosophical ideas are only at best decorations or parasitic commentaries on the hard objective triumphs of science, and that they themselves are immune to the confusions that philosophers devote their lives to dissolving. But there is no such thing as philosophy-free science. There is only science whose philosophical baggage is taken on board without examination, right? What he's basically saying is that science and the scientific method can never ever be free of any philosophical baggage, right? And these scientists, when they speak to us and tell us, oh, we don't have beliefs, we only have certain knowledge, they're lying to themselves and they're lying to us, because there has to be philosophy behind the science that they are doing. There has to be assumptions and things like that. The next one is an even better one. This one is a very famous evolutionist. He's called Michael Ruse. Michael Ruse. He's famous. He does debates. He has writings, books, whatever, well published. And he said in an article that interviewed him, how evolution became a religion. He says, he's an evolution philosopher, Michael Ruse, R-U-S-E. Evolution is promoted by its practitioners as more than mere science. Evolution is promulgated as an ideology, a secular religion, a full-fledged alternative to Christianity with meaning and morality. Evolution is a religion. This was true of evolution in the beginning, and it is true of evolution still today. Right? And then he's actually got a book, Darwin as Religion. This is an evolutionist saying Darwin as Religion, a book that he wrote. He says in that's published by Oxford University Press, right? So these are not like, quacks or whatever. These are the people themselves, right? He says the theory of evolution given by Charles Darwin in the 19th century has always functioned as much as a secular form of religion as anything purely scientific. This is a clear admission from this guy here. There are other statements here. Another one, Richard Lewontin. He's an evolutionary biologist. He makes another very revealing acknowledgement. He says, it is not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world. But on the contrary, we are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and a set of concepts that produces material explanations, no matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated. Moreover, that materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. What he's admitting here, basically what he's admitting in simple words, is there's nothing in the scientific method that's proven to us, or that can prove to us, that the universe is only material and there's nothing beyond it. There's nothing in science that's compelling us to actually hold this view. No. Rather, right, we have previous convictions already. We have previous assumptions already that we are bringing onto the table. And it's those beliefs and ideas that are forcing us to accept only a materialistic explanation of life, and so on and so forth. He's readily admitting to you. He's readily admitting to you. In fact, there's another one as well called Thomas Nagel. Thomas Nagel, here we are. Thomas Nagel. This guy's an atheist, philosopher. He has a book, Mind and Cosmos, Why the Materialist Neo-Darwinian Conception of Nature is Almost Certainly False. Right? He's an atheist, right? And what he's admitting in this book, he's saying, look, what makes me choose atheism is not like science. It's purely because I don't want to live in a world where there's a God. I just can't accept that type of world, right? And so because I'm not comfortable with that, I prefer like some sort of atheistic, materialistic explanation. So he's readily admitting, and he's written a book to show that the whole past century and a half of materialist neo-Darwinist science is almost certainly false. Right? Tell that to a Pakistani atheist sitting in Islamabad or in Egypt, haughty and arrogant, thinking that he's the elite of the society and he doesn't follow parables and fables, of the past. Tell that to these people are living in cloud cuckoo land, because they don't know what these people are admitting. These are shrewd people in the affairs of the world, right? And some of them are honest, like this guy here, and they are readily admitting that it's not science. It's just that we don't like to live in a world where there's a God and we're going to be resurrected and we're going to be held account. We can't live with that idea. So we just want to live, and we conduct our science on that basis. Not that the scientific method has actually shown or proven to us that what we are believing in is true. So anyhow, these are some quotes. There was another quote I wanted to mention here, if I can find it. Okay, I think those are the quotes. So I guess this next point then, which is point number 5, was that we as Muslims don't deny science, we don't deny the scientific method. This is an absolute slander to claim that we do, and this is actually from our religion, and Muslim scholars have written books to argue for the fact that science is based upon like scientific method. They're actually included within the religion of Islam and within the worldly sciences which Islam encourages and it promotes. That is a slander. You can't attack us with that, and you can't say that we are backward, ignorant, foolish. This is a gross slander. At the same time, we have these atheists, neo-atheists, new atheists, neo-Darwinists, right? They are at the top of their field. Daniel Dennett, Michael Ruse. These people are readily admitting that what we are upon is actually, it functions as a religion. And there's nothing in science that's leading us and forcing us to basically, choose these views. We philosophically prefer them, and we prefer to live in a world which is like this, right? So this couldn't be any clearer. Now, this obviously now brings us to the whole issue of, well, okay, how are these atheists then basically arguing by way of evolution, by way of cosmology? How are they arguing that there's no creator? Why are they doing this, and why has this been promoted so much, and why are Muslims being deceived by this? Well, this is where the trick and the deception is, you see. Because whereas these atheists are honest and true, these other people are playing a trick, just like that child in that example. Remember the child I gave you in that example? And there's the simple childlike version. Oh, it fell itself, it broke itself. And there's the sophisticated, deceptive kind of version, the random fluctuations between matter and energy in the room, and all that nonsense, whatever. What they are doing with these speculative theories is they are just trying to say that same thing, but in a very complicated, cryptic, technical way, so that you can't actually figure out what are they really saying then. Like what's the essence of what they are saying, right? That's what they are doing. And alhamdulillah, our Muslim scholars, the scholars of the Muslims, they have seen through this. They have seen through this ruse and this deception and this trick. And so I want to quote to you a statement from Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, and this is from his book Miftah Dar al-Sa'ada, and he says, and there's a whole passage here, it's a beautiful passage, and he's addressing the atheist or the naturalist. And what he says here, so he's addressing the atheist. He says, "It is as if I am with you, O pauper." I mean, you, O atheist, naturalist, as if I'm stood with you, and you are saying, whilst you say, "All of this is the work of nature, and within nature are wonders and secrets." So he now responds, right? This is no different to the child saying, "Oh, the glass fell itself and broke itself," right? Same thing. Had Allah desired to guide you, He would have questioned your soul and said, "Inform me about this nature," right? Meaning Ibn al-Qayyim is asking the question, tell me about this tabi'ah, this nature that you're speaking of. Is it a stand-alone essence, possessing knowledge and power to perform these amazing works? Or is it just an arad, right? So what he's saying, I'll summarize it in a nutshell. He's saying, okay, you are saying that nature is behind all of these works, right? It's the workings of nature. So what is this nature you are speaking of? Is it like an actual entity? Is it like a being? Is it like an actual being? If it is, then why don't you just call it what we call it? We call that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So why don't you call it the creator and the maker, right? If it is an actual entity with an actual existence separate, if that's what you're saying. Because all you're doing is, really, you're just merging the creator with the created, and you're using word games, right? This is why atheism is nothing but wahdatul wujud. And that's why Ibn Taymiyyah described the saying of Fir'aun. When you analyze the saying of Fir'aun, it is nothing but wahdatul wujud. It is the unity of existence, right? Matter is all there is. There's no maker, no creator. That's all it amounts to. And really, the atheist is in fact a mushrik. The atheist is a mushrik. He's a polytheist, nothing more, because he's just taking Allah's existence, His names, His attributes, His actions, and just merging them with the creation. And then he's calling it nature, right? So if this thing you are calling nature, is it a standalone entity? Is it a thing that exists by itself? قَائِمٌ بِنَفْسِهِ? If so, then why don't you just call it what we call it? This is just a matter of you just playing word games. Why are you calling it tabi'ah? Right? If that's the case. And if it is an actual arad, meaning that if it's like a quality or an attribute of the creation itself, then that is what we call tabi'ah, meaning the nature that a thing has been given right, by something else, right? So, the nature of a plant and the nature of an animal and the nature of, whatever else, every entity has a tabi'ah, right? Why don't you just say this is, because this is in the Arabic language, what it actually means, tabi'ah, like a ghariza. Ghariza refers to a trait that's ingrained within you, it's part of you, right? And tabi'ah, meaning the essential elements and quality of a thing, right? So it is Allah who put that thing in there, right? So I won't go through the rest of the passage because it's beautiful, it's really, really good. But again, for brevity of time, I won't go through the rest of it. So here, this is Ibn al-Qayyim exposing what's really happening here by the materialist or the atheist. He's trying to say the same thing that the child said, but he's playing word games and deceptions and trickery, just like Shaykh Ali Nasir al-Faqih pointed out. That's what the atheist has. But inwardly, he's not really convinced. He is not really convinced. And that's why the atheists, when you say to them, they will say, look, I don't have beliefs, I just have an absence of belief in a God, right? They don't want to commit themselves to saying there is no God, because they don't have any certainty, right? Because to say there is no God absolutely, you have to have a knowledge of all that exists, which you don't, right? And your science doesn't allow you to gain that knowledge either. So what they do is they play word games. They really believe there is no God. It's an actual belief. It's a dogma, right? But they don't want to be seen as people having beliefs, because only religious people have beliefs, right? Only backward people have beliefs, right? So to hide the fact that they actually do hold this belief, they say, no, atheism is the absence of belief in a God. The absence of belief in a God. Whereas really it's belief in the absence of a God. But they don't want to call it a belief, right? Because they don't want to. So anyhow, we could talk more and more and more about all of this. I want to finish with the scientific method. I want to give you, inshallah we'll finish with this, because this was about science, right? So what you've gathered so far then, that the truthful and honest among the atheists know that this is not about science as the scientific method. They readily admit that this is a personal preference, a philosophical choice. There's nothing in the scientific method itself that justifies this materialism. They just feel they have previous ideas and convictions, and they want to keep them on the table. And that's how they want to do their science. They are openly admitting this, right? So they're the truthful ones. Then there's the others who come along, and they're obviously being brainwashed and indoctrinated. They believe all these speculative theories. They believe they are scientific when they are not. These are not scientific theories, right? The Big Bang, cosmology, evolution. These are not strictly scientific theories. They are models. They are just sophisticated ways of telling a story without any real evidence, scientific evidence. But for you to grasp that, I want to finish by going through with you what is the scientific method, how do you do science, right? And if you pay attention to everything I'm going to mention, you will have the tools and you will have the knowledge to immediately interrogate any of these people and ask them to demonstrate the actual science with the actual scientific method, right? So I'm going to give you all the basic parameters for this by way of an example, right? So obviously you'd have to pay attention and take notes, but the topic wouldn't be complete if I didn't, go through this. So inshallah we'll go through this and we'll conclude the session inshallah ta'ala. So the scientific method, remember I said the science as a method, and then there's the science with capitals, with a trademark and the registered trademark, and that's the religion and the ideology, right? That's something else, and this here is the actual scientific method that we follow, in learning about the creation and in arriving at truthful knowledge about the creation. Okay, so science and the scientific method. Science, it means to know. It's from the Latin. It means to know, and it's a system of knowledge which is concerned with the physical world. To us, Allah's creation. It's Allah's creation. And the phenomena, and what we have to do is we have to make observations which are unbiased observations, and systematic experimentation. These are two keywords. Unbiased observations and systematic experimentation. So whenever there's a keyword, I want you to remember those keywords, right? Unbiased observations. We have to be neutral in what we are seeing, right? We can't bring any emotion or previous ideas or previous assumptions. It has to be totally neutral, unbiased observation. What's happening here? What's the process here? What's going on? Right? So we are acquiring knowledge about the world through unbiased observations and systematic experimentation. Right? When you make models, or when you use the computer to do a simulation, or when you write mathematics, these cannot replace empirical testing of hypotheses. Right? That is not science. A model is not science. Right? It can't replace actual experiments to test the hypothesis. Right? So I want you to be clear that much of what we have today of like the fraudulent pseudosciences, whether it's in, let's say in much of evolution, using models, computer simulations, whether it's in the climate change fraud and the hoax, using models to model the so-called carbon and all the rest of it, whether it's virology and gene sequencing, that's a whole another fraud in itself. All of these, in these fields, we are not dealing with actual science and the actual scientific method. Right? It is make-believe, it is deception, it is trickery, right? So we have to make a distinction between science is you have to do an actual physical experiment, right? Through systematic experimentation. So in the scientific method, what are we trying to do then? We're trying to identify cause-effect relationships. Bold, right? That's the key word. We're trying to understand, okay, is this a cause of this? Right, what's happening here? Why is that happening? What's the reason for that? Because we're observing this again. Well, what's the cause behind it? Right? So let's make a hypothesis. Let's so what we are looking at actions, processes, events, interactions that are happening in Allah's creation. We are saying, why does that happen? What's causing that? What's behind this? Right? And we are making these observations, we are noting them down. It could be measurements, it could be whatever. Then what we do, we then make like a hypothesis. We now have to try to give what we think is happening and why we think it's happening, and we write it down as a hypothesis. Then we have to systematically and experimentally test that to see if it's true or not. Right? So I want to illustrate this whole process with an example. With an example. If people travel on sea, so imagine we're living in the 1700s, 1800s. People are traveling, leaving the coast of England, they're going to America, and what's happening is, from 100, 200 sailors, there's like literally 50% of them are dying of something called scurvy, right? Scurvy, what we now know, is a vitamin C deficiency disease. Vitamin C produces collagen, it's integrity of like tissue and things like that. And so these people, they start losing the integrity of the collagen, the gums start bleeding, there's so many other things happen, and basically they die, right? So so let's say we are observing this, and we're thinking, why on earth is this happening? They've got bleeding gums, impaired skin, hair, they die. So what we do is we say, okay, our hypothesis is that this could be a dietary deficiency, and let's generate the hypothesis that the reason for this is vitamin C. Right? Our hypothesis why this is happening is there's a deficiency in vitamin C, and this is what's causing this disease, right? So this now is our hypothesis. We've seen the observation, they're neutral, unbiased, right? People are simply dying, falling ill, right? We want to explain why this is happening. So we make the hypothesis, what we think is happening. We say vitamin C deficiency is the cause, and the effect is bleeding gums, death, disorders, whatever, right? So this now is a testable statement. There has to be a testable statement. Bold, this is another key word now. There has to be a testable statement, right, to check whether the hypothesis is true. We then have to conduct an experiment and repeat it many times, and then we have to use sound reasoning to either prove this statement as being true or to falsify this statement as being false. Right? So the next stage is we now have to create the hypothesis statement, but it has two parts to it, right? So this is the real scientific method. So we have to create a mirror image of the hypothesis, right? There has to be a mirror image, right? And the mirror image is because the two statements that we are going to split the hypothesis into are contradictory, right? So the first statement is called the null hypothesis. Null hypothesis. Here we state the lack of vitamin C during long sea voyages will not cause scurvy. Will not cause scurvy. This is like the default position, right? This is called the null hypothesis. We put it as a statement. The lack of vitamin C during long sea voyages will not cause scurvy, right? This is the null hypothesis. Then there is the alternative hypothesis. This is the mirror image. We say the lack of vitamin C during long sea voyages will cause scurvy, right? So this is a mirror image. The statements are a mirror image, right? And so in our experiment, in the scientific experiment, what we are trying to do is we are trying to falsify the null hypothesis. Write that down. Falsify the null hypothesis. This is the whole purpose of doing the actual physical experiment. We want to falsify the null hypothesis to prove our actual hypothesis. So can you see how there is an experiment and we are trying to falsify something, right, to prove our hypothesis. So what we are really doing here is we are going to do an experiment. We are going to isolate vitamin C as the independent variable. Independent variable. You have to write this down, which is the cause, right? And we're going to see, is it going to produce the dependent variable, which is the scurvy and whatever, right? Because we're going to manipulate the independent variable to see if it produces the dependent variable, which is the effect. Okay, so now let's look at the design. Now we're going to design the experiment. So I will say, right, let's go to the, Plymouth or whatever it is, Liverpool or whatever. We're going to have 2 ships. Each ship is going to have 200 people. All these sailors have to be basically of the same age. They've got to be 18 to 30 in the peak of their youth, healthy. They must not have had any prior illness, So this will be called ship A, this will be called ship B. And on ship A, we are going to give these people normal food without any oranges, lemons, limes, no citrus whatsoever. We're going to give them like a deficient, vitamin C deficient diet, and that's the ship number 1. Ship number 2 or ship B, same people, same age. We're going to give them, buckets and buckets of, oranges, lemons, juices, and we're going to say to them, you have to specifically every morning, you have to squeeze 2 oranges and drink it, afternoon and evening, and you have to do that consistently on a daily basis till you reach the shores of, America somewhere. Right. So now we've isolated the variable that we are testing. However, we also have to have controls. You've got to write that down. There has to be controls in the experiment, because if we don't put controls in the experiment, we don't really know which variable are we really testing, what really caused the effect. That's why I said that all the men have to be of the same age, right? We can't put 18-year-olds on one ship and put like 70-year-olds on the other ship, right? Because now we're introducing, there's a lack of control here, and we could be confounding what's really creating the effect, right? So we've controlled for the age, we've controlled for the health. We also have to insist that the ships have to travel pretty much side by side in the same trajectory, the same path. Why? Because one ship could be over there, one ship could be 100 miles over there in a storm or whatever, and we're not really accounting for the weather, right? So we have to make sure that the ships are going side by side, all to the same destination. Right now, all the basic ingredients of the experiment are now here. We have the hypothesis, the null and the alternative. We're trying to falsify one to prove the other. We have the experiment design, right? We've isolated the variable that we're testing. We made sure that that's the only thing that we're testing. all other confounding factors, we've eliminated them. So now it's just basically, let's go to the other side and let's see what the results are. So basically, we're on the other side, on the shores of America, and along come the ships. So now we obviously look, and we look at each ship. So if we see on one ship, 50% of the first ship had scurvy, 40 of them died, or whatever, and we compare the second one, and we see, okay, there was only, like 2% of that ship got scurvy, and literally nobody died, right? So that now, we have falsified the null hypothesis, right? A lack of vitamin C does not produce scurvy. That's false, because the experiment has shown it to be false, right? So now, we have proven the alternative hypothesis. However, do we stop here? No, because now another element of the scientific method is repeatability. So now we have to repeat this again, right? So now we'll do it again. We'll repeat the whole thing again, and we'll do it maybe 3, 4, 5 times, and then somebody else will do it as well. From America, they'll do it the other way around, right? So we're repeating it to show that this wasn't a fluke, there wasn't something that we missed or whatever, there wasn't something, See, the scientific method, just like in hadith, for example, in the ilm al-hadith, right? There's a method to isolate true reports from false reports. What are the factors? There has to be continuity of the chain. We have to know every single person. We have to establish the integrity. He's not going to tell a lie. We have to establish the memorizing ability of that person. There mustn't be any, it mustn't contradict what's already established. There mustn't be something hidden that we haven't really seen, right? It's a similar, right? So in the scientific method, this is how we arrive at a correct and accurate knowledge about the world in which we live, the cause and effect mechanisms. To us, this is evidence of the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because this is, this is from hiss. This is not even contested, right? To the atheists, it's like, we don't like to live in a world where there's a creator and we're going to be judged and this, so we're just going to, philosophically, we choose naturalism and materialism. Oh, you do it in that way then, right? Okay, right. So, but you can't now say there's no creator, because you have no ilm of that. You can't say that. So that's why, as Shaykh Ali Nasir al-Faqih said, the atheist is never coming from the position of absolute certainty and absolute. He can't. It's possible, an absolute conviction, and he's really lying and deceiving and tricking himself when he's really kind of coming with all this kind of rhetoric and whatever else. Anyhow, the point being, from this description I've given you, you can now take the basic elements and interrogate anyone who's making these claims, and basically say, well, okay, what was your... So tell me then. Okay, I'll read the summary. Through the above, we have given you an example and explained the basic terminology by which you can ask anyone who makes so-called alleged scientific claims. Ask them for the experimental evidence. Where's the physical, real-life experiment that you did with real things, with real actual things, that you manipulated real things, right? What was the independent variable? What was the dependent variable? What were the controls that were built in? And how was the cause-effect relationship determined, right? Did you isolate the actual factor? Anyway, so you get what I'm saying. You mentioning all of the elements, and you interrogating the so-called claim. So when you apply this scientific method, and you apply it to, for example, let's say Big Bang cosmology, the Big Bang, or you apply it to the claim of, like, evolution, random mutations, natural selection, what you will arrive at eventually, and this is not the place to go into all of that, is you will realize that these are nothing but stories. They're just telling stories. Just like the child said, oh, it broke itself, it kind of rolled off and it broke itself. It's a story. Falsified by the evidence, and falsified by the real scientific method. So we could show the child, okay, so we could take the child and say, okay, let's put this glass on the table. Let's close the room. And let's go away. No one's going to be in this room. And the next day, let's come back. Oh, the glass is still there. This is like the scientific method. How come the glass didn't break like you said it did? Right? There's something not right here. What's going on? Like when we apply the actual scientific method and demand that type of evidence, we realize that these theories that they are giving us, they're not strictly, they're not actually scientific theories. Right? They're elaborate stories. They're elaborate stories, right? Just like the child trying to escape from having to admit that he knocked it and it fell. And just like the atheist trying to deny that there is knowledge, power, will, wisdom behind creation, it's inevitable he has to invent stories. And this was actually why this whole materialism and naturalism as an ideology was actually invented. It was invented. It wasn't discovered. It was invented. So this now is a whole different topic. This now is from the bab of history, going into history and looking into the British Royal Society, which is basically a group of Freemasons and occultists, and that's from the bab of history and not necessarily science itself. We'd have to go in that direction and then show you all the history and the evidence from the books to show that these people came along, and they are occultists. They have an actual religion that they follow. They believe that man will one day become eternal. He will discover the secrets of eternal life, and it's just a matter of discovery. But in order to put that thing into process, we have to bring the ideological framework for us to go in that direction. So they invented naturalism, materialism, and from that came Darwinism, because Darwin himself, his Erasmus Darwin, his grandfather, whatever, all these people, they were in those kind of elite circles, in the Freemasons, Illuminists, and they kind of generated these ideas to lead to like a scientific type of, basically a scientific kind of dictatorship, right? Basically, right? So that's another whole different story. That's all in the history books in plain black and white. That's a history topic, not a science topic. And this shows also the importance of always studying history along with the subject matter, right? Because it's the same with the religion. Like an Ash'ari can come to you and start bamboozling you with the ta'wil and whatever else. You as a common person, you don't need to know the Quran, the Arabic tafsir. You don't need to know ilm al-hadith. All you need to know is, sorry, but all I know in history is that there was two men, Jaham and Ja'ad, and they mixed with the Sabi'ah and the Jews and Christians, and they just inherited the speech of Aristotle. All I know is what you're saying is what you're saying is comes from them, and what they took it from was basically from those people. That's all I need to know, that you're upon batil. Right? He doesn't need to be an alim, mufassir, a muhaddith, and knowing all of the to analyze. Now, okay, he brought a narration from Imam Malik, right? This narration is not true because this is. He doesn't need to know all of that. He can falsify that just with a basic bit of knowledge of history. This shows the tremendous importance of the knowledge of history, because history itself can falsify much of this nonsense that's being fed to us, and that's being treated as actual science when it's not. So, inshallah, I think what we'll do is we'll bring it to a close. There's a lot more material, many other things, but I think inshallah the objective that I wanted to achieve by way of this lecture, we spoke about the fitrah. We mentioned simple evidences from his that this is sufficient. We gave many examples from modern examples, protein zip codes, cells working like computers. There's even more. In fact, there's even more than this. Even just the so-called gene cell kind of DNA system, that in itself is a whole topic in itself. But this is endless. The ayat of Allah are endless. The more you study, the more conviction and yaqeen you get in this. Then we spoke about the scientific method and the truthful atheists who are willing to admit they're following a religion, and then the deluded people over there who basically, they have different reasons why they're upon atheism. Either it is because they're unhappy with qadar, they had a trauma, the father died, the mother died, committed suicide, they broke a leg, they had living in poverty, so they're just very angry and angry against al-qadar. This leads them to reject a creator. This is from rejection, from anger with al-qadar. Or it could be some people, they have shahawat, lusts, desires, pleasures. They just don't want to let go of them. They don't want to live a life of this is halal, this is haram, you can't do it, right? And then they justify their choice by way of pseudoscience that they're then taking from the materialists, right, to justify their life choice, right? That's some people. Then the third type of people are those who are genuinely, they study these pseudosciences and they become convinced by them. So this is just pure shubha. Right? These people are the easiest to deal with. If they are true and they are honest, and you present to them, they are easy to deal with. The difficult ones are the first two, or the ones who have some sort of power, authority, position, like many of these atheists maybe who exist in these countries. They think that we are the elite of this country. We've acquired the sciences. We're not like these fruit sellers and these goat herders and these backward people. We are the elite and the crop, because this is arrogance, this is pride, right? So it's arrogance and pride. Are you unhappy with al-qadr? Or you have lusts and shahawat that you want to follow? All of these things now, the shahwa, right, merges with the shubha, which is the material pseudoscience, and then this then produces the types of people that you will encounter, right? So these are the people on this side, in contrast to the ones who are honest and believe and accept and say that yes, evolution is a religion, materialism is a religion, we just like it they are the true honest people who are speaking the truth, and they're honest about it. Right? They're not deceiving themselves, nor they're deceiving other people. So we spoke about that, and then finally we just looked at the scientific method itself, how you should have a good basic understanding of what it is, so that you can look at any claim, any paper, and see, okay, well, what are they doing here? And what you'll find is the most of modern science today is basically it's false. It's not based upon the scientific method. It's false reasoning. It's prediction testing, which is not really the falsifiability model. That's a whole topic in itself. But anyway, I'll stop there, inshallah. وبالله التوفيق والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Jazakumullah khairan for your patience.